How's everybody doing? Good. It's been a long morning, but I hope that you've learned quite a bit. I'm going to attempt to teach you something, and hopefully in the process, I'll learn something about this room, about this community, and hopefully maybe even a little something about myself. So let's get started. We're here to talk about outliers. And I think it's probably fair to say that outliers come in many shapes and sizes. We know that the definition in the dictionary is that an outlier is a person who stands apart from his or her group. But in the process of standing apart from his or her group, we can look back into history and see who some of the people are who have done that very thing. We all know about Galileo, and of course, he is considered the founder of modern science, and so many of his achievements have helped to become the foundation of the society in which we live today. But it was his discussion, his belief in heliocentrism, that the Earth was not the center of the universe, that it was actually the sun, that got him labeled a heretic and placed under house arrest for the remainder of his life from that point on. But even now today, we can see that so much of what we do is based upon what he believed. Steve Jobs, we all know about this guy. The applications and the products that his company, Apple, produced, the iPad, the iPhone, the iTunes, all of these wonderful things have revolutionized the society in which we live. And Steve Jobs was a bit of a jerk. He was really hard to deal with. He was hard to work for. He was an egotistical, hard-driven man. But it was his vision that we have all come to respect. And it is that vision that we all are benefiting from today. We're familiar with Rosa Parks. Her refusal to move to the back of the bus was one of the major spurs in the civil rights movement. And it was her action which actually was quite in the opposite of what most people believe an outlier to be, because in her action in becoming an outlier, she was just simply trying to be treated like everybody else was being treated. But it was her action that led to one of the great achievements of the society in the United States in the 20th century. Robert Nesta Marley, a.k.a. Bob. Everybody knows his music. You can go across the world and people can sing the words of One Love to you. But this was a man who was born half black, half white, in a tiny little town, in a tiny little island in the middle of the Caribbean. And yet it was his words, his deeds, his desire to spur a revolutionary change in the society in which we live that led to him being one of the great musicians of all time. Geoffrey Canada, he was raised by a single mom in a poor neighborhood in Harlem, but this woman instilled in her son a belief in education as a method of self-improvement. And when he got himself educated, he returned to Harlem to establish an educational program to lift African-American youth to the point that now the Obama administration is replicating his approach in 20 different cities across the United States. A revolutionary man with a revolutionary idea that brought so many people together. And of course, Vincent van Gogh, one of the greatest artists of all time, who created some of the pieces that have been the most expensive pieces of art ever sold. And even though through his life he lived through mental illness and struggled to maintain himself, he became one of the greatest influences of our contemporary culture. But you know, those people, in becoming outliers, they continue to talk about and to do and to achieve things that we in today's society don't even view as being particularly revolutionary anymore. They're just part of the mainstream. But what they did and how they achieved what they did, they weren't always part of the core of what we do. Sometimes at the core of what we do, we have to be a little bit different. And this is what I'm trying to do as a spoken word artist. So what is spoken word? Well, spoken word is quite literally words that are spoken. But they are spoken in an artistic way. They are spoken in a way to try to get people to think about the world in which we live, to think about what it is that we can do in order to move our society forward. And this is what I am trying to do as a spoken word artist. Not just myself, but many other spoken word artists who are out there who have been able to make a great impact on the world in which we live. In fact, spoken word has many different roots, many different influences that have created it into where we are today, but it was really the poem, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," which was when the beginning of the modern spoken word movement to permeate, to make its way into the mainstream consciousness. And you can see here Saul Williams. He's probably the world's best-known contemporary spoken word artist. He starred in a movie called Slam and was one of the main characters that were followed in the documentary Slam Nation, which first brought poetry slam into the worldwide consciousness. And Saul, he is a quintessential outlier. He does not see himself as a product of the society in which he lives. He sees himself as someone who can help to multiply awareness, to help multiply those things that we hold dear while fighting against those who would seek to divide us and those who would seek to subtract from the happiness we all have. And if he didn't open himself up to the possibilities of the unknown, well, then he would be lost. And so these are the sorts of things that we as spoken word artists are trying to get people to think about when they hear our words and see us perform. You may be familiar with Sarah Kay. She absolutely electrified the TED conference in 2011 with her talk, as well as her performance of the poem Bee. And now she spends her time traveling North America, speaking about spoken word in the digital age. Shane Koyczan is Canada's best-known spoken word artist. He was the first person who was not born in the United States to win their National Poetry Slam individual title, and he was a member of the first ever Canadian Championship Slam team. But Shane has become probably best known as the artist, the spoken word artist, who's had the largest audience in the history of our art form when he performed his poem, "We Are More," at the opening ceremony of the 2010 Winter Games in Vancouver. And some of you may be familiar with Tonya Davis. She's currently the Poet Laureate of the city of Halifax. But in 2010, she created a video poem with her friend Andrea Dorfman, "How to Be Alone," which has become a viral sensation, viewed by over 5 million people across the world. And Tonya is probably, because of this, Canada's best known and best beloved female spoken word artist. What do all of these people have in common? What they are doing is trying to live and embody the great Mahatma Gandhi quote, "To be the change that you wish to see in the world." And as spoken word artists, that's what we're always trying to do, to push the envelopes, to make sure that people have the opportunity to think about what the world could be like, to envision how they can help to make the world that way, and then to go out and do exactly that. So as spoken word artists, we constantly deal with these 3 sets of contrasts. In fact, all outliers deal with these 3 sets of contrasts. The first being collaboration versus instruction, second being imagination versus application, and the third being brashness versus courage. We all struggle with these contrasts, but when you become an outlier, when you become a trailblazer, when you become someone that people look to as an agent of change, you have to navigate these things and learn the best way to approach it for yourself. And this is what I want to talk to you about first, is collaboration versus instruction. The collaborative trailblazer is interested in bringing people together, to work in a collegial way, to make sure that everybody who is part of the process, number 1, feels valued, number 2, has their experience brought into it and used in a productive and positive fashion, and 3, feel ownership over the process, so that when whatever the success is that is reached as a group, though the trailblazer will get the credit for being the person who spurred that change, everyone will feel like they were part of it. But if you are to approach it in an instructional fashion, it's much more directive in nature. It is an individual who feels deeply impassioned and deeply fired up about their own personal viewpoint, and they're driving forward to make that change and hoping that there will be other people who will jump on board, grab the coattails, and come along for the ride. Now, as spoken word artists, there are many advantages and many disadvantages to operating in those ways. So as an artist, I personally like to create an opportunity for people to perform. Bring people in and mentor them and show them the way to go and support them and encourage them to continue to perform such that eventually they will have their own success. And that is how I view my success. There are those who are much more individualistic and instructive in their approach, where they develop their own way of being, their own perspectives and their own words, and then they go out and they push forward. And when they mentor in a way to have somebody take on their ideas and push them forward as well. And they often do participate quite actively in community, but they never lead it. Because what they're trying to do is to be a spark plug and just go at it alone and plow forward. So there are definitely people who have done both of these approaches. And there are so many examples of people who have been highly successful in pushing forward and creating change by taking one or the other of those approaches. Imagination, of course, is key to any creative endeavor. So, in fact, to any endeavor at all, we've got to think deeply and ponder the issues and the problems that we're facing and come up with ways of dealing with them effectively. And the people who are outliers, the people who can do that most effectively, have an elasticity of the way that they think and the way that they perceive the world around them that allows them to remove themselves from the situation and set back and take a look at it and just sort of take a general look at the land and say, what is it that we can achieve? How can we do this? How can we draw other people in? How can we be successful? And it's that ability to remove themselves from the situation and look at it from a distance, which is what defines them as outliers in the first place. But to have a wonderful idea, to be a great thinker, to be an imaginative person is not as effective if you cannot take those thoughts, that process, and then translate it into a course of action that other people can practically apply in the real world. And so as spoken word artists, we love the ability to just sit back and think deeply and, to stare at that clump of wax, as Amy was talking about earlier. And do that process. But then what is so important is to take that, translate it into the words that we have, and to speak those words to inform and to educate, but to spur people to act. That is the key. Because if you can not translate what you think you can do into something that can actually be done, the amazing things that you wish to see happen in the world around you cannot take place. Brashness versus courage. As leaders, as people who want to see change, outliers must have a set of principles, a set of values that they are using to inform what it is that they do and inform the way that they try to achieve that change. But if you just go off half-cocked, running out into the world, using an emotional response to try to just do whatever you can and just run right into it, it's going to be very difficult for you to have any kind of sustained success. In that sort of a situation, the person who is brash can very quickly become the person who is foolish. You have to know what your principles are, what your values are, what you stand for, to be able to draw that line at which if somebody pushes across that barrier, you're going to defend those principles with vigor. And in certain situations, you're going to go forward and fight for what you need and fight for what you think is right and go forward and knock down those barriers because that is the right thing to do in your mind. In order to be able to do that, you have to have the courage of your convictions, the courage to know that what you say and what you do and how you approach the world around you may be met with fierce resistance, may be met by people who believe that your perspective is wrong, who believe that your perspective is dangerous, who believe that your perspective is revolutionary in a negative and destructive way. To have the courage to stand in that and to still speak your mind is the quintessential task of any spoken word artist. And it's part of what I take so much pride in. Because think about it this way. Humans believe that the greatest fear that they have in their lives is to do what I'm doing right now, is to stand in front of a group of people, naked, not literally, but figuratively, naked, and just speak and hope that people aren't going to judge me or toss me outside or rope me up and toss me in a room or something. But overcoming that fear to be able to stand in your principles and in your beliefs and in your values and in your philosophy and just speak those words, that in and of itself is an act of courage. Every spoken word artist, when they step on stage, commits an act of courage. So now that I've convinced you that spoken word artists are able to navigate those three contrasts and be able to do what they need to do in order to try to be the change they want to see in the world, now I got to try to convince you as to why you should care. We are part of the world in which we live. And when things happen in that society, we want to comment on them. We want to help to drive change. We want to help move things along in a positive way. If things are happening in the world that are challenging, that are negative, a spoken word artist will write a poem, speak it aloud to people, and try to get people to see that there is a problem. Whoa, the light just came on and freaked me out. If something is positive, they want to encourage people to continue to do it and to do more things that will improve the situation. And if nothing at all is happening, they want to spur people to be the change they want to see in the world. Poets are canaries in the coal mine. They're the people who are going to be the first to be challenged whenever there's a situation where change is trying to be achieved. When dictators take over in certain nations, it's always the poets and the writers who get challenged first. They're the ones who are arrested, who are deported, who are exiled, who are murdered. And that is because even though we live in a society where the right to speak freely is protected by law, we can never take it for granted. We must continue to write. We must continue to pursue things because as a canary in the coal mine, that's what I try to do as a spoken word artist. I'm proud and pleased to do so. And I am completely comfortable with living outside of the lines. I leave you with one final word, a final message for you all in the form of a short poem. Stick your candle in the wax and wane when life leaves you taxed with visceral pain. Light up the flame that patterns the airless facts with the wish for the gin when the wick reacts. All the chemicals above eat oxygen for lunch, then breathe heat red and yellow with incendiary punch. Then dribble wax down your sides. If you prize the rise of smoke signals before your eyes, think of peaceful ways to force the pain of flame to wane. So stick your candle in the wax, chanting this refrain. Stick your candle in the wax, chanting this refrain. Light your wick with permanence to fight off the rain. Live your life with perseverance, torching all who gain from those living their lives taxed with visceral pain. This is my candle in the wax, and I'll say it again. This is my candle in the wax, stuck outside the main. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.